Today on the Social Corner.
And it wasn't until I started this journey with Cysters that I understood how important research was, because that influences policy and that filters down to a grassroots level. My honour and decency is not located in my vagina or vulva. It really isn't, because then how would you treat somebody who's been sexually assaulted?
Hello and welcome to the Social Corner. I'm Daina and Mpunzi. My guest today is a TedX speaker and Point of Light recipient and the founder of Cysters, a groundbreaking charity that is challenging cultural barriers in marginalised communities surrounding women's health. She's a passionate advocate for addressing inequalities in minority communities, and I'm also proud to say she's a great friend of mine. Neelam, welcome to the Social Corner. How are you? I haven't seen you for so long.
I'm really good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I think the last time we saw each other was about 3 years ago, from what you're saying.
Yeah.
And time's just flown by.
I think COVID's taken a huge part of it though. So
It really
it's
has.
coming about to 2 years of just being in a COVID life now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Has COVID life become the norm for you, or are you kind of ready to get back out there and be as we were before to some degree?
From a social perspective, I want to get out there a bit more, but from the work that we do with groups and stuff, that's not actually stopped. If anything, COVID's exacerbated our work.
Oh, really?
So we're actually busier than we were before. And COVID's highlighted health inequalities, inequality in general for minority communities. So that's almost backed up everything we've been saying for the last 5 years. So we've got busier, but we've got evidence to back up what we're saying now.
So why do you think it's exacerbated it, as you said? Why do you think it's done that?
So off the back of things like Black Lives Matter, the report on maternal surveys for people of colour, so black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth. That was not a new survey. That was at the least 3 years old, but now it's been taken seriously because of Black Lives Matter.
Don't you find that it's so frustrating that a man had to lose his life?
Yeah.
And Black Lives Matter was around before, but a man had to lose his life for people to sit up and pay attention to inequalities, racial inequalities.
I think it highlighted the point. It's awful that a man had to lose his life for this to happen, but it for me really highlights that the UK, despite their latest report saying we're not a racist UK, we clearly are. There is health inequalities, racial bias, medical gaslighting, structural, systemic medical racism. It all underpins how people of colour are treated within the NHS system. And everything we've been saying for such a long time within Cysters, that people of colour are treated differently. There's people still within Cysters that almost get brushed aside because they've got a higher pain threshold.
Yes.
That's not true.
Yes.
That was quoted in medical textbooks, so when people are learning and going through that medical journey, they're taught that. It's not in textbooks anymore, but the old school way of thinking is still around for a lot of people. So it's really difficult to judge how much of a difference it's made, because as much as people are talking about health inequalities now, I'm still not seeing any action. And that's where the frustration lies for organisations like us.
Do you know what's so interesting about this? Because obviously, I'll get into how we met and stuff in a minute. But from the moment I met you, you were talking about reproductive health within marginalised communities. And I'll be honest with you, I had never thought about it until you said it and you brought it to my attention. And then even when you brought it to my attention, I was like, well, it must be a small group, because it was never something I heard talked about or anything like that. But since all of this, knowing yourself, I've had conversations with my mum, my sisters, the women in my family who've had children. And even they now are reflecting on the treatment that they experienced in hospital, giving birth. And oh my gosh, it's appalling. But there's almost this thing that it was just, we just accept this. This is just this is normal to us. So in terms of the conversation that you're having with major organisations, major institutions, would you say it's a two-sided conversation? One that they need to be aware of the problem, but one that we need to be aware of too?
So it's such a multifaceted conversation. So from the perspective of organisations, they know there's a problem. What they tend to do is try and get minority groups to fix a problem for them for free, which isn't helpful. They don't value that lived experience of people of colour, helping them change structural barriers within the healthcare system or within the organisation itself. So you've got that's one problem. When they're speaking to us, it feels in some part for some organisations that they're listening, they're making notes, they may present to their teams, but they're not actively addressing inequalities in the ways, for example, they recruit, the way they promote people within the organisations, and ultimately the way they they decenter the patient within a conversation. So if you go and see your GP, for example, and you're engaging with them, the GP, they don't have a lot of time. You know, we know how much the strain the NHS is under, more so now because of COVID. So the patient gets lost in the system. And what we really want to do is recenter the patient, recenter those voices, recenter minority groups within majority organisations. And that's what we find really difficult, because actually there's probably more of us, but we don't get representation. You don't see us on the front of campaigns. You never do. And I can give you an example of one that's happened recently with a major charity organisation within this space. They highlighted chronic illness and people that were advocates for it. Out of their list that they highlighted, there was not one person of colour. Wow. Not one. And that's after Black Lives Matter. That's after being told about systemic racism. And when we challenged them, they were like, well, no minority communities reached out to us, or the ones that we spoke to, they weren't free. But then you're blaming the minority communities yet again. Other conversations we've had where we're not reflected in research. So if you look at research generally into reproductive health as an example, usually it's not very well funded anyway. So when it's not well funded and we do manage to get a piece of research, then they're not accessing minority groups to be reflected in that research. So you don't get a proportionate view of how the UK is affected, because if you're looking at one, say, for example, one white woman compared to the experiences of somebody from a marginalised group, it's completely different. The barriers that each individual person, their backgrounds have got are different, and those aren't taken into account. And research is so important. And it wasn't until I started this journey with Cysters that I understood how important research was, because that influences policy, and that filters down to a grassroots level. If we're not in the research from the beginning, we're never going to be part of those policies, and they'll never reflect or meet our needs. So when we're speaking with researchers now, we want to make them a safe space for people of colour generally. I sat in a meeting with some research around urinary infections, etc., and pelvic pain. And the researchers already had preconceptions of minority communities. So they were all white. I was the only person of colour in the room yet again, which is quite normal for me now. But some of the misconceptions that they had was the Somalian community, the only ones that experience FGM. And another comment that was made was community leaders are the gatekeepers of minority communities.
Which is so, I suppose, just ignorant. Frustrating and ignorant to think that everybody in one community knows this community leader and that person is the voice. It's almost that, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X syndrome, where just one person can speak for a whole, group of people. I mean, isn't that outdated? Where are they taking that basis from and thinking that we can still run with this?
Well, I'm really glad I sat in that meeting, because you know me well enough that I can't hold back with stuff like that. So it took me a while to sort of compose myself. I challenged it there. I actually asked to leave the meeting because I felt very uncomfortable. This research study wanted to work with Cysters and wanted to recruit participants for their research. But if they've already got those views, then for me, they're not a safe space to partner with Cysters. They don't embody our ethos, and they don't sort of work alongside our safe pledge, a safe space pledge, because that's important to us. We're working with really vulnerable people here who have gone past systemic racism in the medical setting and then are having to relive that trauma for research. So I want it to be as comfortable as a setting as it can be. So I you know, and I'm really glad, because what the researchers have done now, because I was very honest when I've had a meeting with them, and I said, this is what I want to do. I want to retrain all your team on inclusive healthcare. And that actually encompasses research and work around the trans community that we've done as well, and having inclusive gender-free conversations when it comes to reproductive health, rather than just it being branded under women's health. And they've actually agreed to it. And in the 5 years I've been doing this, there's not been one research organisation that has ever agreed for us to actually come in as a consultant and retrain their research staff, because these are people that are doctors, you know, academic doctors. They never would have thought they'd have to be almost retrained by a grassroots organisation. But I like the fact that they're willing to unlearn these behaviours. So it's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel for me in terms of that. Yeah.
And that's come off the back of the last year, and I suppose just a global consciousness about inequalities and things like that, would you say? Yeah,
definitely. I think it's almost been a case that it's become a sexy topic, and this is what worries me. Sexy topics are sexy for a period of time, and then they just lose interest in them after a while. I don't want minority communities, and we call it trauma porn within Cysters, and there's going to be an article around this where we rehash trauma from minority communities for views and likes and shares, but we're just rehashing trauma all the time, and it becomes yesterday's news at some point. But that individual who's had to relive that journey, they're not yesterday's news. They've had to relive it, so they're going through that trauma yet again. And that's one of my biggest concerns with the way that currently we're working with minority communities, and how other organisations are almost taking advantage and highlighting minority communities, but in that trauma-focused way.
You've talked about trauma, you know, and the trauma that I suppose the people go through when it's being rehashed. But I want to talk a bit about your journey now, because you're so passionate about this, and I think understanding you better helps to understand why that is so. And we met, I don't remember the year, I think it was it 2017?
I feel like it was. It's a very long time ago.
So it was about 4 or 5 years ago we've met. And we were both on a program, a social entrepreneurs program, and we were both starting up our companies. And I remember when I met you, I remember thinking, she's really bubbly and she's always laughing, and you were just like, you had so much to say, and every other sentence was, and it really peed me off, and it really peed me off. Something was always peeing you off, as you put it. And there was this session that we had to do, like a pitch, I don't know if you remember this, where we had to tell our story. And I was sat there waiting to hear what you're going to say, because I just obviously knew you as I knew you at that point. And oh my gosh, once you started to speak, I was like, wow. Do you remember that?
I do remember it.
Do you remember what you told
me? I do. I remember feeling very vulnerable having to talk about it. So growing up, I feel probably I went through things like puberty a bit earlier. I developed quicker in some ways. That was difficult in a lot of ways because my peers hadn't. I started my periods earlier, but my periods were a bit, well, I thought they were a bit weird, but that was sort of passed off as normal. Then I sort of had absent ones for ages, so I just thought it was part of, you know, the puberty sort of stage. I was going through either it was going from sort of absent to extreme bleeding, accompanied with, like, looking back on it was like chronic pain, but I thought it was like the period pain that everyone talks about. Get your hot water bottle, get your chocolate. I thought it was like the normal one. Looking back on it, the way that I used to be, having to go to the bathroom and things like that, and missing certain classes because it was painful. So I went to a school called Rastrick High School, and they had really old radiators, and I remember sort of running early out of class to get the radiator so I could lean against it. It was like the cool thing to do at one point. I don't know why. For me, it was like the lifesaver thing to do was to lean.
Like pain relief?
Yeah, it was like hot. So I was just like this, like leaning against it. And these were little things that growing up that became quite normal for me. And it wasn't until I got to university that they became more of a problem. And that was partly because things had exacerbated because of the way I was living my new life, my university life. You know, I'd started drinking, I started going out, wasn't looking after myself. So obviously when you go to a GP and you're saying, come to uni, obviously I'm not looking after myself, and this is what's happening with my pain and periods and all this. They're kind of like, it's diet and lifestyle, lose some weight, go home, you're fine. This sort of went back and forth for quite some time. It took a good half of the year for me to actually get a diagnosis. And you kind of blame yourself. You kind of think, oh, I'm not. If I was at home, I'd be eating like mom's food. I'd be eating cooked food. I wouldn't be eating takeaways. It's clearly my fault. I didn't get the diagnosis until I had an ultrasound, and the first diagnosis I got was PCOS. And then the doctor was like, oh, yeah, that's what it is. Great.
So it's not diet and lifestyle, it's now PCOS.
Yeah, but it will be managed by diet and lifestyle. So all you need to do, Neelam, is lose some weight. Let me print this off for you. This will be helpful. I remember, because it was like really old computer back then, him typing it all in, and he printed off, I think it was 2 sheets of paper on PCOS, and it wasn't like an official like leaflet or anything, it was a printout. And the only reason I remember it so much is when you print something from the internet, it has the sort of HTTP sort of web address at the bottom. I remember looking at it thinking, well, it ain't that important. It's not a proper leaflet. You know, it's not that deep. But one of the pictures I remember distinctly was sort of the pelvic region. It was sort of blown up pictures of where your ovaries would be and what a cyst looks like, what cysts don't look like. And that's all I really remember from it. Because then the conversation was, if you take the contraceptive pill, it'll be fine.
Right.
Oh, there's a cure. Okay. So on I go to take this pill. I have PCOS, but the pill fixes it. Everything's fine. That's not the truth. The pill does not fix PCOS.
Just for somebody who doesn't know, I know we've got Google, but what is PCOS?
So it's polycystic ovarian syndrome. I think and statistically it affects 1 in 4 women. So you have a higher rate of like insulin resistance. You've got more of a chance of getting heart disease. So it's not all fertility related like everyone thinks it is. And these are things I've learned on the journey. It's not what I knew then. So you've got a higher risk of getting diabetes, etc. I put on a lot of weight on my stomach. I was getting facial hair. I really did not take well to the pill. I had extreme migraines. I actually wasn't going to university at all because I was like, I can't get out of bed. I felt awful. My mood swings were horrific. It was up and down. I really struggled with being angry and depressed, and I was so up and down trying to regulate this period. So for me, then I ended up getting rid of them because it's just a period, right? So it's not, I didn't know anything about any of the other associated conditions. So I can deal with everything else. And that's when I started learning more about it really slowly, because there wasn't any groups that were accessible really that talked about PCOS. All I could find were very American forums online, and everything referred to fertility and IVF and diet and lifestyle. Something that I learned was if you're on the contraceptive pill, you're meant to sort of have some regular contact with your GP just in case. My GP never called me back. It was always me having to go to them. One of the experiences I did have was my GP made a joke. He was South Asian, and he made a joke about like essentially sleeping around. It was like a really flippant comment. He did mention that there's condoms on the way out to get them, and I was just like, yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I'm on the pill. I don't need to worry. It's all fine. Did not think anything of it. Now when I look back, a person of colour in sort of my situation, I'm living away from home, it's so disrespectful to say that. But I'm really, really sure a person who isn't of colour, a white woman, would not have had that treatment either. So I really look back at all my experiences with GPs now with a touch of cynicism, and whether I was actually properly looked after or was I brushed off.
Let's talk a little bit about your family then, because I think when we're, especially at tender ages, like our teenage years, 18, our environment really does shape the way we think and feel about ourselves. What was it like for you growing up?
So I would say compared to most South Asian girls, I've been very, very lucky. I've got a very progressive family. My mum was she worked in sexual health. You know, South Asian woman, it's really not heard of.
Not
so I am not the trailblazer here. People like my mom were. I think what made my journey harder, though, wasn't my immediate family, it was actually the family around. So the aunties, the uncles, because that is where the crux of, like, especially South Asian families, that's how they're formed. It's not just about the immediate family, it's everyone around. So when I went to uni, they were very about bringing shame on the family and doing things a certain way to not bring the family into any disrepute.
What does bringing shame on the family look like? What did it look like to them? What were they talking about?
So I was living away from home. I'd gone to Leicester. The biggest thing was, you know, being with guys. Being on the contraceptive pill was an issue for them.
Really?
Drinking was an issue. You know, I dyed my hair in the first year of uni, like bright red. That was an issue. Everything that is almost completely different to being what the South Asian girl is supposed to look like and be like. You know, I'm supposed to be quiet. I'm supposed to be humble. I'm supposed to make tea for everyone. I'm supposed to make really good tea. You know, that is my life goals. If you ask any of my uncles what's Neelam's life goals, is to make tea and get married.
Oh, wow.
And that's what I had from them. But from my own family, as much as I had, you know, it was very clear from the beginning that as a woman, as a girl in the family, that there will always be a difference between me and my brother. My dad always actually gave us a level playing field. He was really honest with me and said, as a woman, you need to work harder. You know, as a person from like a low caste, you need to work harder. As a you know, person of colour, you need to work 10 times harder. And he was like, you will always have to battle. And I felt it was hard because not only then at 18 am I battling all these cultural norms that I was really battling against, and then battling my body and my mind, because I was really struggling with all of it.
There's so many different influences coming from so many different places. I remember speaking to you and, you know, you talked, and I hope you don't mind me talking about it now, because obviously you've been on the news and stuff and talked about the emotional place that this journey had put you in. Quite a dark place. The thoughts that you would have. And I suppose the lack of hope that you were going to be okay. Can you tell me a bit about that time, like that space that you were in?
That all really springs back to us talking about these cultural norms. And I've already said that there's an expectation of a South Asian girl to be a certain way, be married by a certain age. I had a partner at the time, and I'd obviously had the diagnosis, and I'd told him. He had told his wider family, which at the time wasn't a problem for me, because it's a medical condition, right? No one can blame you for it. And how wrong was I? Really? How wrong was I? Because you can be blamed for a medical condition, because obviously it's your fault. Because obviously Sikhs, we believe in reincarnation. So I must have done something in a past life to have this happen to me now.
Wow.
My fertility was placed on a real pedestal within that family. That who would have been my mother-in-law, his mum was very, you can't marry her, she's not going to have children. You know, and it was heartbreaking to hear. It was horrible. And you know, like, it took me a very long time to get myself into a place where I was quite normal again. But, you know, I really then started struggling with self-harm. I was angry at myself.
But did you blame yourself?
Yeah, I really did. I blamed myself for just not looking after myself. You know, why did I go to uni? Why didn't I just stay at home, eat mum's food? Like, this wouldn't have been a problem. You know, I'd put on so much weight. I think at that point I was hitting about 18 and a bit stone. I was size whatever, and you know, we have a weight bias in the community anyway. And I just felt like I had brought this all on myself, because I just wanted to go to uni and have some fun. I wanted to go out. I wanted to do all the things that typically come with being at uni. But the struggle with self-harm that came with that, and me being so angry at myself and angry at everyone else, because I was angry at my parents I wish they'd just fixed it. I was angry at the doctors because I just wanted someone to fix it. I wanted someone to hear me, and no one could hear me. You know, not only am I bleeding funny and bleeding heavy and then having absent periods, I'm in pain as well. Like, it hurts. Everything's hurting.
And I think that the pain to others can almost, because I don't go through PCOS, but even just period pain sometimes can be debilitating, you know, and I've found that especially for myself as I've gotten older. But I know women who have had or have endometriosis, polycystic ovaries, a range of different, and because it's not visible, because it's not wearing on your skin or on your face, like it's, oh, you'll be fine, take paracetamol, you know, there still now isn't this understanding of how excruciating this pain is.
I think the NHS have actually listed endometriosis as one of the top 10 debilitating conditions in the UK, and that's alongside childbirth. So it gives you an idea. I'm currently under still my investigations for endometriosis. So this is a long battle, and this is with somebody who's got a charity and who's got awareness. I have a great GP. I've got, you know, Dr. Das, who's like an expert in that area, and now Dr. Afifi. Hopefully, I'll get referred to him, who's meant to be an expert in this area in Birmingham. So I have some hope now, but back then I didn't know anything.
So it was just you and the self-deprecating thoughts.
I was angry, and like you said earlier, I was always peed at somebody. I was so angry at the world. I wasn't a nice person either because I was so angry. I pushed everyone away because I just didn't know what was happening to me.
Tell me about that. When you say you pushed everyone away, you mean what kind of people? Who would you push away? Or
so friends and family were the biggest ones. I think because I had been so downtrodden in that relationship, the person that I kept sort of calling out to was my partner at the time. I felt so unaccepted by the family because essentially I was, that I kept trying to be everything they wanted me to be. Down to the way I wore like my clothes. I started wearing Asian suits during the day. Like that's how much I wanted to be accepted, and it wasn't my personal acceptance of this medical condition I have no control over. Anxiety became a real thing for me, having to enter someone's house, their house, and all of this came and it was underpinned by this medical condition. And you know I hate to say this now, but looking back, it was the darkest, horriblest times I've ever been through. Some of the things, you know, I wouldn't wish on anyone. But it's brought me to a place where I am now. You know, I'm in a really good place. I'm actually happy. I accept everything that's going on with my health. I understand, though I don't accept the way the NHS works. I don't accept how long diagnosis times are, but I can work with it right now because I can advocate for myself. I couldn't do that back then. You know, I was 18. You know, I thought I knew everything at 18.
As we all do.
And even in my 20s, even when starting Cysters, I thought I knew everything because I'd been through it, but I'm still learning and unlearning. For me, that's a huge part of it, is unlearning.
And I think that when we talk about unlearning, there's definitely a lot of that has to happen in the community. I think the community needs to find its voice in, and also know its I suppose its rights. So every so often I'll be scrolling through my timeline, and you know, just as you do, looking at the updates, and I'll scroll through and then a vagina will just pop up and you're laughing. But Neelam, I'm going to tell you the truth, it shocks me. Like, it will just pop up, I'm not ready for it, and there's something going on with it, or there's something happening. And I tell you that I'm laughing now, but sometimes I'm bringing this up because I've had to like really have conversations with myself about seeing the images, because I get a bit uncomfortable. And I'm like, oh, what's this? Like, it's a private thing. What's it doing there? But then I'll read the post. I don't worry, I don't just like X off it. I give it time. I'll read the post and I'll see what you're talking about, or what Cysters is talking about, and it makes sense. And then I kind of calm down. But actually, I was thinking about this when I was thinking about you, and I was thinking, well, what's going on with me here? Because I can't be the only woman that feels like that. And I wanted to ask you about the shame that we as women feel, I suppose, around our, you know, reproductive organs and stuff like that. And when they're out in the public in such a way and being spoken about in a healthy context. Why is that? what is happening to me on Instagram?
So I think you've highlighted something, and I'm glad you've said it, because more likely than not, the picture you will have seen is not actually even a vagina; it's a vulva.
Yeah.
So, but that highlights the point. We don't know our own anatomy, do we? Like, we don't talk about our anatomy. We know that, like, men have a penis and testes, and we know what scrotum looks like because we've had all the textbooks around it. But I don't ever remember really having that for female.
No, and if you listen to men talk, like when they're kind of, in their huddle, and they will openly talk about their testicles and their penis and all sorts of things, and refer to it, and in a way that we as women don't do. Yeah. And it wasn't until I started seeing this more often, I was like, why is this so alien? Why is this such almost like, for me, like a shameful thing? What's that about?
I think so. We've never really been taught it, have we? So, and I think because we've never really been taught it, and we've never really been told to use the actual names for the anatomy, and I wouldn't call like my arm my flower. So why am I calling everything down there my flower? Why am I saying that? It's my vulva, it's my vagina. It is what it is. It also makes it easier to have conversations with GPs if there's anything wrong. So I'll tell you about a story, actually. So a colleague of mine wanted to speak to me about like a cyst that she found. She didn't know how to describe it or where it was. And she had come across the phrase in Sex and the City of Lawrence of my labia.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So and the labia is obviously like at the front, and that's the only way she could describe it to me was, I have a cyst and it's on the Lawrence of my labia. And I was like, I'm so grateful though that she was able to even say that much. But normally it would have been, I've got something on my vagina. But your vagina is actually internal. Your vulva's external. Your labia is external. And I think that it partly encourages the conversations to use correct words in the conversation, because it makes it easier for everybody. It makes it less stigma related as well. Things like in language, etc. The word for vagina directly in Punjabi, the most common used one, is actually utilized as a swear word. So it gives you an idea how patriarchy through the years, and because men were the ones that sort of created language, how it sort of treated women and women's body parts generally as well.
But that's the same in the English language, because that word that nobody really likes to say, or some people say it too much. That is coming from talking about a woman's area. See, even now I'm talking to you, I'm like, what should I call it? What should I say? But and your friend is a classic example of, I suppose, that discreetness we as women try. Yeah. And let's talk about our flowers, and that type of thing. But when I think about the conversation that's happening around reproduction, especially with women of colour, in order to remove that, I suppose, those stigmas and that shame and that thing of, well, I can't, I don't want to talk about this. Surely we have to just almost like address it right there and then, call it what it is. Yeah. Call a labia a labia.
Exactly. Call a vulva. Yeah. Don't be so scared every time it pops up on your post.
No, when I see it, I'm going to spell vulva. But no, seriously, like how else can we break down?
I think we actually need to talk about them. You've said something really interesting, how you've had honest conversations at home. It's those intergeneral conversations that are part of unlocking and breaking those sort of intergeneral issues around the conversation. Because really, they've come from people above us who's come from people above them. And no one, I know a lot of people to this day who don't know where their vulva is, or they don't know what it is or what the labia is. Women in their 30s who don't know that because they've never felt like they needed to know that, or they've never had an issue where they've needed to know that. But for men, they would know straight away. So women should be also the same, in my opinion.
And what's this? I mean, you talk about, obviously it's been passed down. I totally agree. I think in colour communities of colour that there's this decency, isn't there, around a woman's place and how she conducts herself in a sexual manner and things like that. Would you say all of it's tied into how we feel about our reproductive part?
Yeah. So for me, it comes down to, and I really want to labour the point here, my honour and decency is not located in my vagina or vulva. It really isn't, because then how would you treat somebody who's been sexually assaulted? Do you say that their honour is now gone because they've been assaulted by someone else, or if they've got something wrong? Menopause, like, my honour is not located and not on a pedestal because of my vagina.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we really need to break past as a community generally.
Yeah. You are, I would say, I can't even speak. You are unapologetically outspoken, I would say, in a time where women are really still fighting to have their voices heard in spaces that we exist within, but don't seem to have representation within. Tell me about the response that you've gotten from some of these times that you've spoken up. Is it supportive, or is there backlash?
It's been a mixture. So I'll talk about the trolling first, because I have been trolled. like it's been crazy. So much so I got to a point where Twitter was the worst. I didn't want to log in. I didn't want to open the app because I was like, this is going to get some horrible messages. You have on all social media apps, you have like a other inbox. Mine used to be horrible. It's not as bad as what it ever used to be. I get the odd few. But at one point, when it was just me talking about this, it was relentless. It was very targeted at my honour and my shame, and how me talking about these subjects had brought shame on everyone. And how can my father look at me? How, apparently my mother had brought up a whore. Those are the sort of conversations people are okay saying on social media to me. And when we originally registered the charity at Charities Commission, we were called Cysters Women Support and Awareness Group, because, like I said, I've been on a path of unlearning, and every day is an unlearning day for me. But I was under the impression it was just women that suffered with these conditions, but no, there's trans people. And Cysters was created out of a place of pure anger. I didn't have representation, so I created it. So for me to actively cut out a section of the community, that are the trans community, by the word having woman in the word of the charity, was therefore, it was disempowering, and it wasn't fair.
Disempowering to women?
Those communities.
If you didn't include, right.
And so it was a very easy decision to take out women in that and keep it as just sisters. The way we're spelt is gender neutral, so it's actually named after an ovarian cyst, obviously promoting sisterhood, and not looking at it from a gendered perspective. It's not easy, because sometimes we're so conditioned to use the word woman, but we make every attempt to be as trans inclusive as possible. But boy, the internet did not like that. Really? I think this was around the time of when Marvel was really big, and I got a quote actually about me saying that I had Thanos'd half the UK.
Oh God.
And I was like, I wish I had the power. Taking the word woman out, I could Thanos people just like that. But gosh. That's how much power I currently hold. So you all should watch out.
I mean, this is a difficult conversation to have. I think just in general, because there's still so much understanding that needs to be had around LGBTQ communities, transgender, and within what you're saying, I wonder if there is, whilst we're inclusive of trans, what about women who still want to be called women who still, do you think maybe that it's that they feel that they're being, I suppose, wiped out, they're being X'd off the board, or they're not now being seen? How, for someone to come and say, I hate the fact that you've taken out the word woman, I almost feel like that person's actually saying, I can't see myself anymore. Because I don't identify as trans, and I'm not against trans, but I don't it's coming out in so much venom and miseducation, and I don't know. How? Because I don't have the answers.
So for me, it's about inclusivity. If as a person of colour I wasn't included for being a person of colour, why would I then do that to somebody else because they identify something differently? I think for me, gender is a social construct. for me, I'm from a South Asian background, so I like to bring it back down to colonialism. Before the British took over India, in India we had what we recognised as the third gender. Homosexuality was something that was normal in India before the British took over. Right. And it was only outlawed, you know, a few years ago. But it was only under British rule that it became an issue. This is something that for me and my background and my ancestors is something that we should be striving for. It's equality for everybody.
I'm really interested to know now how your family feel about you, where you are today, and sisters at this point. Are they more receptive? Like, what's the general attitude now?
So this is interesting because I don't ever think that they never supported it. I think the biggest thing was they were so worried about what are people going to say. In Punjabi, it's "wa loki ki kehna," which means what are people going to say, and it's quite a common phrase that's used within our communities. And I think that was always the biggest worry, is Neelam is talking about vaginas, talking about virginity, talking about sex. Neelam's like going for it. And I think it always comes back down to, because, you know, I'm always going to be South Asian. I'm proud of my background, my heritage. But then there's always a societal thing that you need to get married, you need to meet someone. And who's going to want to meet somebody who's doing all this sort of stuff? Like, what Asian, you know, man wants to be with someone who's doing that sort of work? And that was the worry.
Cultural Asian, traditional,
And I think that was always the biggest worry. You know, because I think from the wider perspective of my family, it was, you know, Neelam needs to make good tea. You know, she needs to be able to make curries and stuff. Like, she needs to be like subservient, and that is not me.
So are they concerned about your tea making now, or are they like, accepted you?
No, I make good tea anyway. I can do it all. I can do it all.
Exactly. This is what it's about. But have they accepted the voice that you have now?
Yeah, it's really good actually. So I was with them recently, and I had to do like a sort of record for a couple of BBC news outlets around heavy menstrual bleeding, and I was talking about the work that Cysters does and how multi-layered it is and how different sort of things that we do. And my whole family was there, my partner, and everyone. I was in a long taxi ride, so they had to listen to it. And my dad said afterwards, he goes, "I'm really proud of you." And my mum had said it, my brother says it, my partner's always saying it. And I think that was huge for me. And I know it's recent, but, you know, to hear it and have that validation from your family over and over in a journey that's not very easy, it makes the journey worth it. And it makes it easier because I know I've got people that I can lean back on. Whereas I know that there's not many South Asian people that would have that level of sort of support from their family talking about these issues. So I'm really grateful that I do.
Yeah. You've mentioned your partner a few times, and I want to get to him in a second. But before we do, you gave a TedX talk maybe a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
A couple of years ago now. And I watched it again recently and just thought, this is really interesting, this concept of virginity and how you saw it. And you talked about how narratives have been created to police women's bodies.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that. Because you talked about, I suppose, what did you say? Bringing back the narrative in terms of reframing our own identity. Where did that come from?
So I feel when you're born as a woman of colour, you have certain expectations on you, and a lot of that derives from males' expectations of you. We talk about things within South Asian communities around like the male gaze, and all of it's to do with women and the way they look, or women's virginity, or being placed on a pedestal relating to fertility. And it really felt like, as women, we're almost cows for breeding. That's how it really came across. Yeah, we're just cattle for breeding. That's all it really felt for me. And the more I looked into like virginity as a social construct, the more I felt actually there's a real double standard here, because when a man loses his virginity, he's really praised by all the lads. You know, he's seen as one of the lads. He's seen as taken a rite of passage. But for a woman, she can't take ownership of her virginity because virginity is almost an act that's done to her. And that always struck me, is that we're almost like these wilting flowers and we need to be protected. And I'm not a wilting flower.
Like we're not complicit in the act of sex or, you know, whether we want it or not. This has to happen to us.
Exactly. And it was almost, virginity was almost seen as a gift as well. I've had so many conversations growing up with males where they've spoken about like a friend of theirs getting married and how she kept her virginity to the wedding day. And I remember hearing comments like, that's so great, what a great thing to do, or what a gift that is. Why is that a gift? Like, he isn't a virgin. Why is it a gift if she is? And I felt that these sexual double standards ultimately have a part to play in how women are treated generally. So I wanted to make that conversation and reclaim that narrative and destroy the idea of virginity, because it doesn't apply to everyone. It then becomes a commodity, and it is placed on a pedestal within sort of some South Asian families still, like when they're trying to get married, etc. And I wanted to get rid of that, and I really wanted to reclaim our bodies for ourselves rather than it being used as a token or a tool.
I understand it, and I think I do see the double standard. I think for myself, coming from my faith background and coming from my background, I suppose thinking about virginity, I wasn't a virgin when I got married or anything like that, but thinking about virginity, it was never really about the man. It was more about my promise to God or what I wanted to do spiritually. And for that reason, I was comfortable with it. I was comfortable with the concept of it, comfortable with whether I lost it or not. It was between me and God. And I think when I hold it to that standard, regardless of whether I'm a man, a woman, or trans, whatever, there's a level playing field then. But when it's like a man's telling me I've got to keep it, like that's, for me, that's when it gets a bit of a grey area.
And there's so many things that branch off from the back of that. So there's people that engage in anal sex because they want to keep their virginity, because they think vagina and penis sex is the only way to preserve it. So they engage in risky sexual behaviour.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing on the rise with young communities. Right. And that is one of the reasons why the conversation of virginity is actually really important, because you're essentially gambling with your sexual health. There's also the rise of labiaplasty, which is sort of the way the vagina actually looks, to create the designer vagina, alongside hymen reconstruction. So people can have their hymen reconstructed again, so they can experience that first bleed like they may have had when they lost their virginity. And that is on the rise. That's happening more and more in the UK. So this isn't outside of the UK, it's happening more in the UK. So these conversations are quite important for me, because I need to understand, well, why is hymen reconstruction a thing?
How do you, it's a huge topic, and I can see so badly why it needs to be discussed. But how do you balance different beliefs and different kind of, without disrespecting someone or offending someone, bringing all of this to the table to find a healthy resolution? How do you think that happens?
For me, there is never going to be a resolution that fits everyone. For me, it's education. We talk so much about empowerment. Everything that I see when it comes to women is women's empowerment. And for us as an organisation, you can't be empowered unless you're informed.
Let's talk about your narrative, your now narrative. You're in a healthy relationship, as you described earlier, and I've seen all the pictures. I've seen the, what's the hashtag that you do? Me and you?
You, me, us.
You, me, us. And I'm like, okay, this is a TV show. Sounds like the title of a program or something. You're so not the Neelam I met. And I was like, I can't wait to meet up with you, because I don't want to use the word softened.
Yeah.
I actually see a different side of you. What has happened, Neelam?
I don't know. So for a long time, like, I've spoken about how anger fueled everything. And it did. And it got me where I was. It was a barrier. It was a safe space. Anger is a great tool to push people that you don't want away. Yep. I didn't mean to sort of meet my partner. I was sort of peer pressured into like starting to date again. And I was really lucky when I met Cal, because one thing that I had decided in my partner, what I wanted, I'm going to lay my cards on the table from day one, and that meant everything. And it's going to be a very take it and leave it type of attitude. And I never thought to this day that he would stick with me, knowing everything he knows. It was sort of our first date was really more of a friend catching up, and it sort of progressed from there. I was so grateful for the time that he gave me. One of the things that really inspired me about him is the amount he put into understanding me. So he watched my TED Talk. He watched a documentary I'd been part of called 100 Vaginas to understand what it was and why I was getting trolled for it. He read up on things around endometriosis and PCOS, and I was so taken back by somebody that invested that time into me, that it really became a place where that he became my safe space, and I became very open with what I wanted. And with Cysters, I've struggled for a long time, like, should I have a full-time job? Should I have a side hustle? What shall I do? And for someone to sit and say, leave your jobs, I've got us, you need to do this, has been such a big thing for me, because I've lived on my own for however many years since I went to uni, so since 18 to 32. It's just been Neelam against the world. I have never had a partner in crime, and everyone knows this about me, and I think that has softened me, because Callie is completely the opposite to me. I am the loud one, I'm the brash one, I'm the one that will make decisions based on emotion. He is rational and very calm, and I think that grounds me.
It's a balance.
Yeah, my friends probably like him better than me. In all honesty, it's the truth. They all love him, because I think they've all seen the change in me, and I didn't realise that change had happened. But I've got better relationships with everyone around me because of that, because I have the time for other people now and the space for it.
Well, when you talk about Cysters and the growth and everything, are you proud of where Cysters is now?
Yes and no. So I still maintain Cysters should never have been created as an organisation, because they shouldn't have been a need for us. If we as an organisation could shut down tomorrow because everything that we stood for doesn't need to exist, we have systemic equality in the NHS, people are heard, education is throughout the UK for minority people, etc. If we had everything on that wish list that was a yes, and we could shut down tomorrow, I would be happy. But the fact of the matter is, what has fueled the organisation is systemic inequality in the healthcare system. Diagnosis time, the way people are treated. And that, for me, is nothing to be proud of. That, for me, shows that there's a gap and an issue that's being addressed by the third sector. So I am proud in the sense that we're doing a lot. I feel like the doors that I knocked on 5 years ago are now starting to turn around and come to me now. It's just not something I ever wanted to do. It was never my dream. I just wanted to make sure nobody suffered or had any bad experiences in the way that I did.
And that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. I think there's a lot to be proud of. I think as much as I understand exactly what you say, but the fact of the matter is there is inequality.
Yeah.
And Cysters is in the gap.
Yeah.
And that is something to be massively proud of. So I'm saying that to you as your friend.
Thank you.
I'm proud of you. And I just want to know, what's the future hold when, you and Cal? That's the ultimate question after all of this empowerment. So, are there plans there for a family, things like that?
I was really lucky. So when I first started dating Cal, I think within the 3rd week, I had to go and see Dr. Das, who is one of my sort of consultants at Spire. And I was in pain afterwards, because every time I have sort of an internal exam, it creates me a flare-up. I saw Cal straight afterwards. I had a really honest conversation with him about things like fertility and things. And, he still stuck with me. So I think that shows a lot. And for us, it really grew us as a couple. That was like 3 dates in. It wasn't even a real date. I was in pain. I was just like, I need to tell you this. And, he listened, and that's all I needed. If he had it his way, he would have got married last year. But, COVID. So we're just kind of rolling with things. And
And
who knows at the moment? I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to sit back and wait.
Sit back and wait. It's a good option. So this is the social corner, and it's all about people like yourselves who are carving their social space and making real change. And the question I ask everybody at the end of the interview is, where would you like to see your social corner in the next 10 years? What would you like to see for the space that you're in?
So I'd love to see more advocates in this space who are, you know, not only making a difference within their communities, but more at a wider level. So I don't want to see more Neelams, but I want to see more people with the platform. Like, I want to build more people up so they can run as advocates, you know, and be social change makers. And it really put pressure on sort of those statutory bodies to make changes within their own organisations. You know, I want Cysters to continue and thrive, to be a safe space for people of colour in this area. And really, I just want to really, that diagnosis time, I want to bring it back. I just really want equality for all people of colour within these spaces.
What do you want for Neelam?
In the next 10 years? Jeez. Right, I need a dog. It's a chow chow. It's fluffy. It's like a little lion. And me and Cal to be in our own homes, whether we have children through adoption or our own. That's the sort of thing that I want. I actually want a family and a home now. Okay. Not something that me and you would have said a long time ago, because I was very like, no, not
Couldn't even talk to you about it now.
No.
Look at us now.
I know, it's mad, isn't it?
Yeah. Neelam, I have to say, this has been, on my list of girl chats, probably one of the best ones.
So thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. And, yeah, thank you.
Thanks.